DiJonai Carrington of the Chicago Sky promised revenge on live television. She said Caitlyn Clark would pay and that the claws would be out, literally and figuratively, and told everyone she'd handle it herself on August 23rd by being the primary defender on Clark. So she did get her rematch, and Clark answered with 37 points, 10 assists, and 8 threes. By the fourth quarter, Carrington wasn't talking anymore. Stick around because we're breaking down all 12 records Clark and the Fever set that night, exactly how Carrington's big mouth turned into total silence, and what Sophie Cunningham said after Clark's performance that turned out to be one of the funniest lines of the Fever season. Let's show our love for Caitlyn and Sophie down in the comments below. Let's go back to August 8th, because that's where all of this actually starts. Sophie Cunningham is up in the air, Carrington comes across with her elbow, and it rakes straight across Cunningham's head. Officials looked at it and didn't just call a normal flagrant, they upgraded it to a flagrant 2, which means Carrington got tossed from the game right there. And here's the part that made people mad. After the hit landed, Carrington didn't check on Cunningham at all. She just stood there, staring her down, like she wanted credit for it. Cunningham woke up the next day with a stiff neck. The league fined Carrington afterward, but for a pro athlete, that fine is basically nothing, pocket change, and Fever fans noticed. So instead of sitting quietly after getting ejected, Carrington grabbed her phone in the locker room, mid-game, and posted 2 words, "white privilege." She tagged the Fever in it. Then she followed up with a second post that just said August 23rd, like she was circling a date on a calendar for revenge. Using your phone mid-game is actually against league policy, but nobody punished her for that part. And that's when this stopped being a basketball story completely. Because once white privilege got attached to a clothesline foul, it left the sports world and landed on regular news pages that don't cover the WNBA at all. Suddenly, casual fans who watch maybe 3 WNBA games a year wanted tickets to this rematch. Talk shows picked it apart, hot take shows built entire segments around it, and somebody out there was probably running a countdown clock to August 23rd. Carrington told cameras straight up that she'd guard Clark herself that night and settle it, which is a bold thing to promise a month in advance. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham, the actual person who got clotheslined, didn't post a single clapback. She just showed up, did her job, and let her early comments do the talking, saying flat out that Carrington couldn't guard Clark. No bulletin board material, no soap opera, just a quiet confidence that turned out to mean a lot more than it seemed at the time. Now here's where the stakes get real. Chicago needed this win badly for their playoff hopes, riding a 3-game win streak after beating New York and Golden State. Indiana, on the other hand, had dropped 2 straight and were playing the second night of a back-to-back without Aaliyah Boston, their starting center. On paper, this actually favored the Sky, and for a half, it looked that way too, Chicago up 51-50 at the break. Some analysts figured Boston's absence gave Chicago the exact opening they needed. But none of that matters when you're the one who made the promise. Carrington put the pressure on herself with those posts, nobody forced her hand, and now she had a full month to back it up in front of cameras that weren't going anywhere. The ball goes up, and immediately Carrington starts talking. The scoreboard doesn't care about talk. From the opening tip, Chicago showed up looking for contact, not buckets. Carrington in particular wasn't playing defense so much as she was performing for cameras, mocking Clark after plays that weren't even hers to celebrate, bumping her off the ball when she thought the refs weren't looking, jawing at her every chance she got. This wasn't just one player losing her cool either. The whole Sky team leaned into hard fouls and extra shoves all night, and you can trace every bit of it back to that clothesline on Cunningham 2 weeks earlier. Officials let a lot of the early contact slide, which only encouraged Chicago to keep playing like the whistle didn't exist. Here's the problem with Carrington's whole approach. She guarded Clark like it was still 2024, ducking under screens, bumping her off spots, betting that Clark would hesitate or shy away from contact the way she might have as a rookie. That Clark doesn't exist anymore, and the gap showed up possession after possession. Every single time Carrington ducked under a screen expecting a step back or a hesitation, Clark rose straight into her shot before Carrington's hand ever got up. Most of Clark's 8 threes that night came with Carrington guarding her directly, which has to sting more than anything else on the stat sheet. In the second quarter, Carrington picked up a foul call and immediately started arguing with the referee. throwing her head back like Clark had flopped on the play. Cameras caught the whole thing and it spread online within minutes, fans calling it exactly what it looked like: a grown woman throwing a tantrum over a foul. 40 seconds later, Clark answered with a step-back 3 right over Carrington's head. Clean look, no hesitation, splashes through the net like the argument never happened. With Indiana up 36-34 later in the quarter, Carrington ran back on defense and shoved into Clark out of pure frustration after getting cooked on the previous possession. Clark didn't yell, didn't get in her face, didn't even bother looking at her twice. She just waved her hand, the same wave you'd give someone bumping into you at the grocery store, and jogged back up the floor like nothing happened. No retaliation, no words, nothing for Carrington to point to afterward. That clip went everywhere online within the hour. The next escalation came right after another Clark 3 fell over the top of Carrington. Instead of getting back on defense, Carrington shoved her with no ball anywhere near them, and no basketball reason for it at all. Clark's response was nothing again, just a turn and a jog back down the floor, which honestly looked worse for Carrington than any argument could have. Indiana's bench noticed everything happening and started hunting Carrington's matchup on purpose. Stephanie White was up off her seat. The whole bench was standing and celebrating every time Clark waved her off, and Indiana started running plays right at Carrington on both ends once they smelled how rattled she was. While Carrington chased her own reputation around the court, Clark was quietly building a stat line that would rewrite the record book completely, and most of it happened before the fourth quarter even started. Let's get into the number that started all of this. 37 points, 10 assists, 8 threes. That's a monster line by itself, and honestly, it would be enough for most nights. But that stat line barely covers half of what actually happened, because Clark walked away from this game with 7 separate records, and some of them are almost hard to believe once you hear the details. Record 1 and 2 came together in the same box score. Clark became the first player in WNBA history with multiple 35-point, 10-assist games in one season, and this was her second one this year. Now stack that next to this. It's her 5th career game with at least 30 points and 10 assists. The rest of WNBA history, every player, every season, every era, combined for 4 of those games total. 4 players, 1 game each, and Clark just beat that number by herself. She's not chasing the league record anymore. She's the whole category. Record 3 is about staying power, not just one big night. Clark now has 8 halves this season with at least 15 points and 5 assists, and that's the most in a single season in league history. Here's the twist though. The old record belonged to her too, from 2024. So she didn't just beat the league, she beat her own rookie year, which tells you her second season isn't a step forward, it's a completely different level. Records 4 and 5 both live in her shooting. Her 8 threes against Chicago set a new career high. And that same game made her the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 250 career threes made, getting there in just her 88th game. Some players take 6 or 7 seasons to hit 250 threes. Clark did it in under 3. That's not a slow climb up a leaderboard, that's a sprint past everybody who came before her. Record 6 moves away from scoring completely. Clark now has the second most double-doubles by a guard in WNBA history, and she's built that resume in barely 2 full seasons. Guards above and below her on that list needed 5, 6, sometimes 7 years to get there. Clark got there while most players are still figuring out the league. Record 7 closes the list out, and it's the cleanest example of what's actually happening here. Clark joined an exclusive club of players with at least 750 points and 250 assists in one season, and the only other name in that club is Clark, from 2024. Nobody else in WNBA history has ever done it, not once. So when people say she's breaking records, that's true, but the more accurate version is she's competing against a version of herself that nobody else in the league can even reach, let alone beat. And through all 7 of those records, Clark wasn't the only Fever player putting her name in the book that night, because Kelsey Mitchell was quietly building her own case a few feet away, both individually and together with Clark. Kelsey Mitchell had 7 points at halftime. Quiet, forgettable, nothing that would make you think twice. Then the third quarter hit and Mitchell scored 14 points in that quarter alone, 6 threes on 9 attempts for the game, and Chicago had no answer for any of it. She finished with 30 points on 10 of 19 shooting, adding 4 assists, 2 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block for good measure. That kind of jump from invisible to unstoppable in the span of one quarter is exactly why defenses can never relax against this fever team. That 30-point night pushed Mitchell's streak to 23 straight games scoring 20 or more points, and that's her own WNBA record, extended again. Nobody else in league history has ever put together a streak like this, and Mitchell keeps adding to it every time out. On top of the streak, Mitchell now holds the highest three-point percentage in the entire league this season, and going 6 of 9 from deep against Chicago is exactly the kind of night that backs that number up instead of just decorating a stat sheet somewhere. Zoom out from Mitchell's line by itself, and you get record 10. Clark and Mitchell now own the most 30-point games by a duo in WNBA history, and this was their third one together this season. No pairing in league history has done it more times than these two, and they're still adding to that total in real time. Combined, Clark and Mitchell dropped 67 points on just 43 shots between them, which is about as efficient as a backcourt can possibly be. They also combined for 14 of Indiana's franchise record 18 threes that night, Clark hitting 8 and Mitchell hitting 6, meaning two players outshot most entire rosters from deep by themselves. Clark talked about what Mitchell does for her offensively, saying it takes pressure off her, especially late in games when the pace wears you down. She can hit Mitchell on a cut, give her the ball in isolation, and Mitchell just makes life easier out there. Stephanie White backed that up too, saying it doesn't matter what either of their shooting percentages look like in any single quarter, because between the two of them, they can always find a way to get one going. That's the whole point of playing them together. Defenses can't load up on Clark without opening the floor for Mitchell, and they can't sag off Mitchell without giving Clark room to work. Depth mattered plenty too, especially with Boston sidelined all night. Lexi Hull scored 14 points on 6 of 8 shooting, knocking down 2 of 3 from deep, her first double-digit scoring game since July 9th. Michaela Timpson added 12 points on 6 of 7 shooting with 9 rebounds, and she came up with a block on Camila Cardozo that swung momentum right back to Indiana whenever Chicago tried clawing back in. Between Mitchell's streak, the duo record with Clark, and role players stepping up without their center, Indiana wasn't just winning, they were burying Chicago from every direction on the floor. And all of that individual production was about to add up to one team record that finished the Sky off for good. Halftime ended with Chicago up 51-50, and honestly, if you walked away at the break, you'd think this was a tight one all the way through. Then the fourth quarter happened. Indiana outscored Chicago 30-13 in that final period alone, turning a one-point game into a 113-90 blowout by the final buzzer. That's a 17-point swing in 12 minutes, the biggest scoring gap of any quarter in the entire game. And it's exactly the kind of finish that ends a losing streak and buries an opponent's playoff hopes in the same breath. The three-point shooting is where this game turns from a win into a record. Indiana made 18 threes on the night, a new franchise record, and they did it on 33 attempts, shooting 54.5% from deep as a team. That's not just a hot streak, that ties for the 8th most threes in a single game in WNBA history. Clark hit a career-high 8 of them by herself, and Mitchell knocked down 6 more, meaning 2 players combined for 14 of Indiana's 18 makes. Volume and efficiency almost never show up together like this. Teams that jack up 33 threes usually make maybe a third of them. Indiana made over half, and that combination is rare enough that most franchises never see it once, let alone from 2 guards doing it together. Zoom out from the game itself and you get to record 12. The 2026 Fever now own the most single-season wins in franchise history, sitting at 25 wins on the year. Indiana built that number without Aaliyah Boston, their all-star center, who sat out with a right leg injury. Boston being out should have hurt the front court badly, but Mercedes Russell stepped into that spot and moved the ball well, using her size and length on both ends to keep Indiana's offense flowing the way it needed to. Lexi Hull added 14 points on 6 of 8 shooting, And Michaela Timpson chipped in 12 points and 9 rebounds, plus a block on Cardozo that Chicago never really recovered from. Stephanie White talked about the fourth quarter afterward, pointing to stops and transition offense as the difference once Indiana found its rhythm. She brought up Russell by name too, calling her a ball mover whose length mattered on both ends once Boston went down. White wasn't treating this like some statement game either. Her tone afterward was business as usual, like the team was just doing what they're supposed to do every night out. That's the kind of response you get from a team that expects to win big, not one that's shocked by it. For Chicago, the math got worse than just one bad loss. This defeat, paired with a Washington win the same night, officially knocked the Sky out of playoff contention for the year. Coach Tyler Marsh said afterward, the team still had games left and wasn't ready to mail it in, but the standings didn't care about intent. Chicago finished the night at 15-23, eliminated, while Indiana kept climbing. And the player who promised all this chaos a month earlier? She was about to have the quietest night of her season. Here's Carrington's final line from the game she circled on her calendar for a month. 7 points, 3 for 11 from the field, 0 for 3 from deep, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block, and a -5 in just 18 minutes. That's it. That's the whole revenge tour. She promised Clark would pay, promised she'd guard her herself, promised August 23rd would mean something, and it ended with a shooting percentage worse than 30% on the exact night she picked out herself. Watch her body language. Once the fourth quarter started slipping away, and it tells the whole story. No more mocking, no more jawing at Clark after whistles, no more theater for the cameras. Carrington spent the last stretch of the game just trailing Clark around screens, trying to keep up, looking like every other defender who's tried to guard her this season and failed. The talking stopped the second the scoreboard turned into a blowout, because there's nothing left to say when your box score is doing the talking for you. Sophie Cunningham, the same player who got clotheslined and never said a word back, waited until after the game to drop the line that ended up everywhere online. Cunningham said even Carrington's long nails couldn't stop Caitlyn, tying it straight back to Clark's career-high 8th three, the one that dropped in right over Carrington's outstretched hand. It's a short line, it's funny, and it lands exactly because it's true. Cunningham didn't need a single angry word for 2 weeks. She let Carrington do all the shouting, then closed it out with one sentence that summed up the entire night. Stack the build-up next to the box score, and the gap is almost funny by itself. 2 weeks of interviews, a viral white privilege post, a countdown to August 23rd, a promise to guard Clark personally and settle the score. Against that, you get 7 points on 11 shots and a loss by 23. Broadcasters caught the gap live, pointing out how loud Carrington had been off the court compared to how invisible she looked on it once the ball actually went up. The internet didn't wait long to flip on her either. Within minutes of the final buzzer, fans pulled her own white privilege post and sat it right next to the final stat line. No caption needed because the numbers did the roasting by themselves. Then the next morning, Carrington posted again, this time complaining about a special whistle favoring the Fever, blaming officials instead of owning a bad shooting night. Fans jumped on that one just as fast, pairing the whistle complaint with her 3 for 11 line like it was the punchline to a joke she kept writing herself. Line up the clothesline, the white privilege post, and now the referee complaint, and you've got 3 separate incidents in 1 month, all self-inflicted, all searchable, all attached to her name. That's not the kind of pattern that keeps sponsors comfortable. Talk without production doesn't hold up once the cameras are rolling, and Carrington just gave the whole league a permanent example of exactly what that looks like. 2 teams walked off that floor into 2 completely different futures. Indiana leaves with 12 records, a 25-14 mark, and the most wins in franchise history. Chicago leaves eliminated, out-talked, and stuck, replaying a revenge promise that turned into a 23-point loss. Clark's night puts her right in the MVP conversation next to Aja Wilson, and with Mitchell's streak alive and the bench proving it can hold up without Boston, Indiana's championship case just got a lot louder. Playoffs are coming, and this team just showed exactly what that looks like. Stick around, because Fever coverage is only getting started. Let's show our love for Caitlyn and Sophie down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications as we're bringing you all the action and top stories. Click the video on the screen, and we'll see you in the next one.